This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Did you ever notice how weird people get about the start of the new year? Seriously, why do people actually think that just because the date turns to January 1st, that automatically signifies that the new year is going to be sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops? Do people still really live in that fantasy? Look, that's not even to say that you shouldn't be cautiously hopeful that good things happen in the new year, but I'm more so talking about the people that always say, man, 2022 was a horrible year for me, but 2023, we're going to turn things around. That's going to be a great year. Okay, how? What are you going to do to turn it around? What steps are you going to take to actively make it a better year for you? Going to the gym, eating better, cutting out drinking or smoking, spending less time on social media. I mean, that'd be a good start. Or are you just going to assume that it's going to be better because a number changes on the calendar? God, people are so stupid. Not the people that listen to this show, however. No. The FSWR viewers are my kind of people. Actually, I don't know any of you personally, but maybe you're my kind of people. I mean, you apparently watch the show for a reason, so there must be something captivating about this channel that brings you all back most weeks. And obviously, I do appreciate all the people that decide to come back and check out the podcast because you make the shows worthwhile. I have been at this for about a year and a half now, and I'm still enjoying it every step of the way. No matter how bad things get with wrestling, there's always something for me to sink my teeth into. And you're all just along for the ride with me. And seeing how it is a new year, we got some big stuff on the discussion panel for today, including AEW's first Dynamite of 2023. Wherein the real question was, did they do anything to even tease the idea of turning things around for the better? Or was it just more of the same? Don't give your hopes up. But this was also an exciting week for me because I got to kick the start off for my new year on the Retro Review series. We covered Raw on the Monday show, and for today, we've got NWA Crockett Promotions on the Superstation for 1987, and we've also got World Class Television to cover for the beginning of 1984. We have 1 year in the books for both companies, and now we're just working our way through the library from there. So make sure you all join in there with me. But what do you say we kick things off the right way? It is the FSWR podcast, after all. And we all know what do people really come to hear on the Friday reports. They come to hear me rip AEW Dynamite to shreds. Because that seems to be the most popular thing to do these days. They make it easy. Well, here we are. It is a new year. It's a chance for All Elite Wrestling to kind of hit the reset button and start fresh. Maybe try to wipe away some of the stain that was left on how abysmal things were for the most part in 2022. And I'll tell you, nothing gets you off to a better start of accomplishing that goal than kicking things off with the anti-heat magnet, Chris Jericho. Because, I mean, it is a new year after all, and who better to represent new and fresh than the guy that's been riding the coattails of pretty much any talent in AEW that gains even the slightest bit of traction? Because when I think of new and fresh, the first name that comes to my mind is Chris Jericho. Couldn't have come up with a better idea if I tried. So yeah, they did the match with him and Ricky Starks. The one that we've all been kind of waiting with bated breath to see how soon it would be before Jericho went out of his way to actively kill Starks' push. Right as it was about to take off, too. And for the most part, they pretty much did the deed here. And I know what everyone's going to immediately say, but Ricky Starks beat him clean. And in that assessment, you'd be correct. If you just took that one piece of the pie and tried to apply it to the overall breakdown of what happened in this segment, you might have a point. However, this is Chris Jericho we're talking about here. So you know with him, evidently there's always going to be something that happens, so he winds up getting his heat back in some form or fashion. So even if I want to sit here and say I was wrong because Jericho lost the match, was I really wrong? Was I really? Because let's take a look at what happened here. They wrestled a match. For the most part, it was moderately decent. I'm not going to say it did anything to revolutionize the industry or anything. It was a decent to good TV match between two professional wrestlers. It's hard to tell sometimes in this company who's babyface and heel because the crowd picks and chooses who they like depending on what side of the bed they wake up on or what hometown they're in. So for a lot of it, it was kind of a 50-50 split between who everyone was cheering for. But they do the spot at the end where Jericho had Starks in the walls for a while. Starks is trying to fight out of it. And they do the angle where one of Jericho's lackeys hits Starks over the head with a gimmick. So they're teasing the idea that Jericho is about to win via knockout, but somehow Starks is able to conspicuously rise to the occasion and stay alive. So whatever gimmick Parker or Mac Daddy used, it was highly ineffective. But Starks fought out. They did a few more spots. And then Jericho tried for the Judas effect. Starks ducked it, hit the ropes, gave Jericho the spear for the clean win. And hey, I'll give it this. Had they ended the segment right there and they left out all the bullshit post-match stuff that we knew was all coming, would have been fine. I would have happily sat here to eat my words and say I was wrong about everything I was predicting about this match. Because I expected that by the end of this thing, it was all going to be about Chris Jericho. And because I know better, because I'm what you would call a smart man, I've watched this stupid company long enough now to know that when it comes to virtually anything involving Chris Jericho at this point, it never leads to anything other than making it all about him in the end. So within literal seconds of this babyface win, here comes the rest of Jericho's Jagoffs to hit the ring to start jumping Ricky, including Jake Hager in that stupid purple hat, which makes the whole thing so trite and bush league to begin with. Like every time I see Hager in that dumb fucking hat, the believability immediately goes out the window for me. Because at that point, I know they're not taking any of this seriously, and it's all a big joke to these simpletons. So they're beating on Ricky, laying waste to him, the whole deal. And finally, out comes Action Audrey to save the day. Because if there's one guy who I can believe would be able to rise to the occasion to save one of the hottest baby faces in the company today, it is the 150-pound indie guy that got the fluke win over Jericho on television a few weeks back. Because again, they want you to drink the artificial Kool-Aid that Jericho is actually a giving man who puts people over. And while yes, he put Action Audrey over, yes, he put Ricky Starks over via pinfall, did he actually put them over the right way? Because what was the last visual we see in this segment after all the chaos and bedlam? Yet again, it's Chris Jericho and the rest of the society schmucks in the ring, standing tall, and Jericho's the center of all the attention. And the two baby faces that he put over in the match, where are they at? Left sprout out in the middle of the ring like a couple of job guys, taking away any meaning or impact those victories may have had initially. So at the end of the day, the story is nothing's changed all that much. It's the new year, and at the end of their first big segment of 2023, the whole thing revolves around Chris Jericho. Yet again. So please, feel free to inform me as to what I'm missing here. Is this going to be Jericho's next 3 months of programming heading into Revolution? He's just going to do one heat angle after another with Starks and try to kill his career that way? Instead of making the pain short and sweet, they're going to stretch it out and make it a grind. Just like everything Jericho's been involved with for the better part of 2 years now. Slow, painful, grinding, and merciless. So I didn't like that segment. Again, yeah, Ricky won the match, but who gives a fuck? Was the attention on him at the end of it, or was it on everybody but Ricky? Up to and including the indie guy that no one gives a fuck about. By the way, the same guy that Jericho allegedly burned with a fireball on TV 2 weeks ago in the back came out here perfectly fine. No bandages, no bruises, no visible scarring. Nope. Apparently Action Audrey is a magical healer. Or maybe these idiots just don't know what they're doing. So then for our whoops live television folks moment of the night, how fitting that the train wreck segment of the night involved Jon Moxley. Poetic justice or stupid coincidence? It started off with Tony Schiavone bringing out Adam Page for a chit-chat. So out comes the fake cowboy sporting his H&N denim and cheap boots. Looked like a troubled young adult still contemplating when he's going to decide to update his wardrobe. Page gets in there, basically clarifies that he's not cleared to wrestle. How sad. A tear-jerking moment. But as he's going off on how he'd like nothing more than to punch Moxley in the face and fight him like they've been seemingly doing on this show for what feels like 14 months at this point, out comes the AutoZone attendant himself. And boy howdy, do the jokes with this company write themselves or what? They said it's a new year for AEW. A new beginning. A new fresh coat of paint to try and wipe away any of the leftover skid marks that were left from 2022. And you know what they say? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Especially for this company. So Mox gets in there. He grabs a mic. He attempts to start cutting a promo. And what should the fans all start chanting but the following phrase? We can't hear you. Which right there, that could have been enough to make that the next installment of Botchamania. AEW kicking off the year strong with audio problems. Because they truly are WCW circa 2000. Where everything that could possibly go wrong always ends up going wrong. So Mox just stops. He goes over to try and grab another microphone that apparently had better feedback resonance in the arena. And he gets out about 2 words when the new microphone completely shuts off. And in typical AEW fashion, where they can't get anything right because they fucking suck at everything they do, not only does the microphone malfunction mid-promo, but the production truck also completely fails to censor when Moxley says, and I quote, "Oh, fuck." my God. Oh, man, and what makes it better, not only do they totally miss blurring out fuck on live television, which, seriously, this has got to be like the 15th time in the last 6 months where AEW's dropped an F-bomb in the middle of a live broadcast TV show. At some point, you think these dumb motherfuckers would get something right. But what makes it better is Mox getting on the stick moments later and going, "Can you turn the fucking mic on? Jesus Christ." At this point, I was dying. Fucking howling with laughter. AEW's first show of 2023. Their first episode to kick off the new year. And we've got live mic problems, production crews failing to hit the censor function at the right time, F-bombs being dropped again on a national cable network in prime time. And to cap it off, I honestly had no idea what the hell Mox was even talking about prior to the technical malfunctions. Does it really matter? Not really. In any case, I about blanked out on virtually everything else that happened. No idea what either guy was talking about. Don't care. This feud sucks. And thumbs up for AEW giving us their moment of the year in hour 1 of the premier Dynamite of 2023. We are just cruising for a bruising. Let the train wrecks continue. These are the moments I live for watching modern pro wrestling. Moments like this. Beautiful stuff. Oh, Moxley. I mean, on the one hand, you kind of have to feel bad for him because this stuff only ever seems to come up in the segments that he's involved with. But, I mean, he's totally given up. He has to by now. And actually, on second thought, I may have to rescind that statement. Here was AEW's actual real 2023 moment of the year. The absolute wretched remix of Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal's TNA theme music. Here's a riddle for you. How do you take Jeff Jarrett's old TNA theme song, which is already horrid to begin with, and make it worse? Simple. You combine it with someone else's theme music that does not fit at all. And by the way, I know that's a very controversial take. You will not find more passionate, loyal TNA fans out there than the ones that actively went out of their way to defend the Jeff Jarrett theme song. Those are the true TNA loyalists right there. Because if you could stomach the better part of 10 years listening to that fucking theme music every week, God, your threshold for pain is remarkable. So the match, because there was a match that happened here, it is the Acclaim defending the AEW tag titles against Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal, with Sanjay Dutt and Great Khali bootleg at ringside, because apparently that's the only thing that they're useful for in AEW at this point. And while I have been pretty outspoken about my whole take on the faction with Lethal, Dutt, Satnam Singh, and Double J, mostly the fact that it's a geek undercard faction who've been made to look like dorks on most occasion, when you look at the landscape of AEW's tag division these days, really, are there a whole lot better options at this point? I mean, at least you know with Lethal and Jarrett, they're not going to do anything embarrassing in their matches to expose the business. And again, I say that it was a very solid TV match. No one did anything outlandishly stupid or phony. Max Caster mocking Jarrett on the apron with the Kurt Angle mannerisms was quite unsettling. Probably something that seemed good in theory, but in execution, it also brought back some not-so-fond memories. The spot where Lethal slid out to the floor to bitch slap Billy Gunn, only for Gunn to blatantly run in the ring in front of the official to try to get his hands on Lethal. I maybe would have shot that a different way. I get what they were going for, and when the ref ejected Billy, I laughed watching Double J do the oversell hearty laugh around the ring. That was pretty great. And it got a good visceral reaction out of the fans. But it's just the concept of guy runs blatant interference in front of the official, and instead of the ref just calling for the bell, he has to eject the guy. Like, call a spade a spade. If someone is interfering right in front of you, that should be the end of the match. Once an illegal guy grabs a hold of somebody physically that's involved with the match, that should be enough to say, no, we're done here. Disqualification. So, that spot I thought they could have refurbished in some manner. However, they went with the old classic Memphis finish angle. Poorly executed, of course, because it's AEW, but the idea was there. With all the officials hanging out on the floor trying to kick Satnam to the back, they do the spot where Bowens tries to fend off Lethal, but gets caught with Jarrett's stroke finish. And while Lethal's on top for the cover, Bowens gets his left foot on the bottom rope, but Stephon Smith's view is obstructed, so he doesn't see Dutch swipe Bowens' foot off the rope. So everyone's thinking that they're going to get the fucked finish title switch, which I was getting ready to poon, because I had this odd suspicion in the back of my head that somehow, some way, Jeff Jarrett was going to find a way to try to weasel himself into winning an AEW title at some point, because that's the kind of guy he is. But instead, Aubrey Edwards gets in the ring and starts taking on the David Manning role in World Class to be the second eye for the original ref. So she informs Smith that the heels cheated, which I know, God forbid, AEW managing to do something smart for a change and have the officials call out fucked finishes on television. Would have been useful for, I don't know, about 95% of the way most AEW matches go, where virtually every finish is a fucked finish. But here, they called it out for a change. So the match continues, bell rings. They do about another 30 seconds of wrestling until Lethal tries to stack up Bowens again, but Caster is able to shove Lethal's feet off the ropes, so Bowen can roll through with a cradle to pin Lethal. And within about 20 seconds after that, it was immediately to the back for a sit-down with the girls. And again, I see what they were going for. So I won't fully fault them for taking an old territorial idea and trying to craft it into something for the modern product. On this show, it's highly comical in a way because it's like the polar opposite of the kind of stuff you'd expect to see. But again, dude, I'm always going to revert this conversation back to the Jeff Jarrett syndrome. I just can't see anything he's involved with on TV at this point and not actively groan whenever it happens. The guy can work. I can't put him over enough for the fact that he obviously knows what he's doing in the ring. But there's too much baggage there. We've all seen it. We've seen it more times than we care to count at this stage. I saw it in 2 previous companies, one of which is no longer in business, and the other which has been on life support since the mid-2010s. Nobody wants to see Jeff Jarrett wrestle anymore. Nobody cares. Nobody looks forward to it. Not a single rational-minded person I know that watches wrestling today would say, you know who I want to see more of on TV? Jeff Jarrett. And why? Because it's Jeff fucking Jarrett. End of conversation. What else needs to be said? Anybody that's watching AEW right now, I guarantee you, at least 98% of this audience has seen and or heard about the Jeff Jarrett nightmares in TNA. I can even buy that a lot of the people watching AEW today were not around to experience the WCW horrors with him, but for sure, I can guarantee you that most of the people watching this show today have seen TNA. Double J is not the kind of guy that generates good heel heat in wrestling anymore. And the crowd responds as such. We see Jeff on screen now, and we just shake our heads every time we see it. So I can only hope this feud doesn't persist much longer, because I don't think I need to see the Acclaimed work a long-term program with these guys. Yes, Bowens and Caster do need to work with guys who have experience. But there are other well-equipped guys in this company that can carry that load. FTR is an example. I mean, they just have to get done feuding with the Ass Boys, hopefully actually going over in that feud, but again, with the way this company operates, I don't have much hope. So at the top of Hour 2, they brought out the hometown hero, even though Danielson is technically from Aberdeen, Washington, and not Seattle. The travel distance is close enough, though. So the home state guy, Bryan Danielson, he wrestled Tony Nese, who apparently, A, is still the premier athlete, and B, still has a job, period. But whatever, no one gives a crap about that guy. So let's talk about the only thing that really mattered in this segment. The Danielson MJF face-off. Danielson's ready for a fight. So he calls out the champ. And of course, here comes MJF to immediately try to backpedal and come up with all the excuses for reasons to not fight Danielson tonight, not the least of which had to do with Danielson's lack of anything resembling charisma, saying that if Lance Storm and Dean Malenko had a bastard child, it would still be more charismatic than Bryan Danielson. Saying that just because Danielson looks like a goat does not automatically make him the GOAT. And they kind of went back and forth with the childish dress down lines. To be honest, I wasn't all that fond of that part. You know, both guys standing there making fun of each other's moms. It was, I don't know, a little too WWE-ish for my liking. Like, I want to see these guys verbally admonish one another on the microphone and sell me on why they're better than the other. Not standing there cracking jokes like a bunch of 14-year-old girls talking about their moms having sexual affairs with goats. Just fucking dumb. But the point is that they set up the stipulations for the world title match at Revolution. MJF says that he spoke with Tony Khan, and if Danielson wants the shot at the title to become the number one contender, he needs to wrestle a match on TV every week from now until the February 8th. And I guess win as a result. And Danielson with the best comeback line of the century, where he just goes, "No, that doesn't work for me, brother." No, actually, here's what he basically said. Not too far off, but he said, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wrestle whenever I want and become number one contender because I can." And that one statement was enough for MJF to begin flipping out and saying that he hired Mark Sterling as a lawyer to facilitate these stipulations. And again, Danielson with the fucking great nonchalant witticisms. Dude, Mark Sterling's the worst lawyer ever. But they agree to the following terms. Danielson wants a stipulation for the title match at Revolution. He wants a 60-minute Iron Man match. And unlike in most instances with AEW, where I ask the question, why does so-and-so want this kind of stipulation match for no reason? Well, here they actually explained it. Very well, in fact. Danielson says that MJF has been coasting through life winning matches by cheating. However, he has not proved that he can put in the work like Danielson has over the last year. He hasn't worked hard enough or shown that he has the drive to be able to work hour-long matches. Doesn't have the cardio, doesn't have the mindset, doesn't have the passion. And that's why Danielson is going to use that as his motive to gain a fair advantage in wrestling MJF for the title, because he's already proven that he can go the hour Broadway, which is true. He had those two great Iron Man matches with Kenny Omega and Adam Page not that long ago. The two best matches those guys are probably ever going to have in their entire careers. Just imagine what Danielson's going to get out of MJF. And vice versa. So MJF agrees to the match, but Danielson still has to wrestle from now until February 8th. And while yes, I know everyone's going to immediately jump to the, well, isn't that pretty much the exact same thing they did with MJF and Cody or MJF and Punk? Pretty much, yeah. And you know what's ironic? Those ended up being some of AEW's better programs they've ever done. It's a simple story. There's motives being presented on both sides, and it's done as a way to draw sympathy on the babyface so that when he finally runs the gauntlet, you're itching to see the babyface finally get his when he gets the heel in the ring in the pay-per-view. It's not like this story hasn't been done in the history of the business prior. MJF's just smart enough to take ideas that worked back in the day and then revamp them to fit the modern era. Lord knows anybody else does it. It's why MJF's material is the most captivating stuff on the show most weeks. It's easy to digest, and it always makes sense. Go figure. And I'm really looking forward to this title program now. I've been down on Danielson for a long time now in AEW, and a lot of that had to do with him getting shoehorned into that garbage-ass Jericho storyline for almost the entirety of 2022. But now that he's done with all that nonsense and they're back to spotlighting him in a singles program again, where he's going to go out there and wrestle every week and just be awesome, I can get down with that. Anytime I hear him promise to kick somebody's head in, it gets my attention. I can get down with watching Danielson stomp some dudes' heads in over the next month. This is great. I love this. It is interesting, though, that MJF is only forcing Danielson to wrestle for the next several weeks on television. The pay-per-view's not until March. So what are they going to do between February 8th and the pay-per-view? Good question. Maybe they're plotting something. Perhaps a heat angle that keeps Danielson off of TV until the Revolution pay-per-view? Could be. Guess we will have to find out. So after that, I did a little fast forwarding. There was an AR Fox Swerve Strickland match that really didn't look all that enticing to me on paper, so I skipped over that. I still would like to know where this AR Fox guy came from and why he's been sporadically showing up on my TV for Christ knows what reason. And I need a better excuse than, oh, he's an indie guy. That goes without saying. 98% of AEW's talent pool in this company is indie guys. That's why the majority of the shit sucks. On the subject of things that I don't know as to why I should care about, Paige, Tony Storm, and Hikaru Shida as a 3-person unit. Seriously, why? Because AEW already doesn't have enough factions going as it is? They really needed a 93rd ongoing faction for television? And of all the people to put together, talk about drawing names out of a hat. Whatever. I'm already spending too much time talking about it. No one cares. And admittedly so, with me talking about all the constant knockoff WWE light skits this company does from week to week, I was really fixing to hate this eulogy segment with the Ass Boys, the whole memorial ceremony for FTR IP. Because on the surface, yeah, it was pretty fucking dumb. Something straight out of a Raw segment. But Austin and Colton, man, these guys are something else. Coming down to the ring with the funeral organ music playing. They got the graphic up on screen that cites FTR's death from the time they signed with the company to show when the Guns beat them on television. And they got all the posters of them in the ring, and they're dishing out their sob story deal. I think my favorite moment is when Austin went to say, "I have something to say too." And under his breath, Tony Schiavone nonchalantly goes, "Email it, please." Now, obviously, with FTR working the Wrestle Kingdom the same day, they weren't going to be at the building to return the favor to the Guns here. It was goofy. I like Austin and Colton. They're obviously very charismatic guys, and they're really doing great in their roles as a snotty young punks. It's not the most ideal program for guys like Cash and Dax to be in, just given the different level status of both teams. I think a program like this would have been better served if FTR was just coming into the company as the new hot babyface duo, and you got a couple young kids show up to try and pick a fight with them. And of course, FTR wind up cleaning their clock and embarrassing them on television. But again, that's something you would have wanted to maybe explore a couple years ago when FTR first came in. Not at the tail end of their run in 2023 when they've already got one foot out the door. To me, all this seems to be indicating is that they're looking for any excuse possible to get these guys to not re-sign. I mean, negotiating contracts and talking about better pay is one thing, but for guys like Cash and Dax who actually love this business and want to be involved with the best the company has to offer, again, no offense to Austin and Colton Gunn, but is that really the best AEW has to offer them? And even if FTR go over in that feud, then what? You going to send them back at the Acclaim for another babyface title match? They already lost clean to them on television. I don't think that's going to serve much of a purpose at this point. You could always go back to the well with that third match with the Beta Bucks, but again, that would require the Bucks to put FTR over, and we all know that's not going to happen at this point. So really, what else is there? Man, I'll tell you. I look at the scope of where FTR is right now in the pecking order. The only thing that comes to mind, Midnight Express circa 1990. Big fishes in very small ponds. And really, I don't think the comparison is that far off. Look at how miserable things were for Eaton, Lane, and Corny during that final stage of WCW in 1990, right before Cornette and Lane walked out. Doing jobs left and right, being intentionally buried and humiliated at almost every turn, being made to look like complete jokes. And even though they were still obviously the best team or unit in WCW at the time, you never would have known it by the way they were being poorly handled. It's where I am with FTR right now in AEW. I know they're the best tag team in the company. Any rational-minded person watching knows they're the best team in the company. So how do you explain their booking? How do you explain how they've been purposefully sabotaged at every turn? It's because of the people in charge of overseeing everything in that product. The jealous EVPs not liking the fact that there's another tag team out there that threatens their fragile little egos. That there's another team out there that, God forbid, is better than them. And whereas in most professional instances, where you would maybe want to take that level of competition to try to level yourself up to achieve that same goal, instead, the Bucks would rather sulk in their own misery and play the victim card, like they always do. And as a result, they make sure that Cash and Dax are kept down at every turn. That they rarely, if ever, have a chance to showcase why they're the best tag team in the world. And if they do get to showcase that, it's not going to be on AEW television. Because how else do you explain the way they've been treated over the last year and a half? At least at one point, I could say that FTR were actively on the show most weeks and being involved with important programs. Remember when they were doing the Pinnacle stuff with MJF? At least we could say they were on TV. When Cash and Dax were having blowaway matches on television last year with the likes of CM Punk, or each other for that matter, obviously the Bucks didn't like that. So now they're not even giving them the time of day. Now when we do see FTR, they're either out there to do 15-second running angles or they're getting jobbed out on television. So again, you tell me what I'm missing. 1990 Midnight Express, man. It's the exact same fucking story. The only thing different here is that I don't think Cash and Dax would walk out of AEW without having finished out their contracts. I mean, if they were going to, they probably would have by now. By now, they're just buying their time and waiting for the deals to run out. Hopefully at that point where they can ride off into the sunset and do their thing on a platform where they'll actually be given the time of day. No handcuffs. It ain't going to happen in AEW. That's very abundant now. Anyway, they followed that with some more girl stuff that got the obligatory fast forward for me. I only got so many hours in the day, and my time is precious. I did, however, watch the main event. Samoa Joe and Darby Allin for the TNT title. I watched it from beginning to end. And by the end of it, here was my main takeaway from everything that I saw. Sucks to be Wardlow. Good God, did that guy get the shaft or what? Tony bent that guy over and did him dirty. Whew. Where to start? Well, for one, I guess we can begin with the jumpstart attack. Because we got to have those in virtually every Darby Allin match. I don't think I've ever actually seen a Darby Allin match without the pre-match attack. Wherein more often than not, he's the one doing the attack. And he's supposed to be the babyface, allegedly. So they're out on the floor fighting immediately. Darby's hitting Joe with the skateboard several times over. Nobody's coming out to break this up, by the way. They had the whole entire fucking United States Army out there at one point to hold back Satnam Singh, but when it comes to trying gaining control of these guys for having a fight outside the ring before a title match, no, they just let it go. Apparently all the officials are on their coffee break or something. Somehow during this melee out on the floor, they've conveniently set up a giant 15-foot ladder at the top of the ramp so that Darby can do a senton dive off of the top of the ladder where he barely missed slipping off the thing and crashing straight down to the ground. Would have killed him immediately. And the giant flip dive off of the ladder was done to, well, not be the finish, because of course that would make too much sense. For AEW, it is the precursor spot that leads to the opening bell to officially begin the match. After we had literally just seen the biggest spot done in the entire segment before the match even began, now we actually have to watch the guys wrestle for another 12 minutes. And keep in mind, too, Darby came up favoring his knee as soon as he did the dive onto Joe. Came down and tweaked his knee as soon as he made contact with the rampway. So a completely unnecessary flip dive that led to basically nothing of substance except a possible leg injury. Because that's what AEW really needs to do to kick off the new year is more injuries. Yeah, that's promising. Meanwhile, they're in the ring doing stuff for a while. Joe's working over Darby's knees. It's going relatively fine for a TV match if you completely ignore all the Carney-level daredevil stunts they were doing 5 minutes prior. But they have Darby fight out of a coquina clutch for a near fall. And at that point, Darby starts firing back up on Joe, manages to fight out of the clutch again, send Joe into the exposed turnbuckle that he had ripped off earlier on. And at that point, Darby taking from the playbook of Super Cena by completely no-selling the legs so that he can hit Joe with not one, but 2 back-to-back coffin drops. And Darby wins the TNT title. I believe for the 3rd time. Although that belt's been flip-flopped so much over the last 2 years, it's hard to even keep track anymore. But yeah, Wardlow. Gotta feel bad for that guy, right? What a geek he turned out to be. Basically taking the same concept for 2 back-to-back Samoa Joe matches, making the big guy look inferior to the littler guy. Because when you really think about it for a minute, that's the story they're essentially telling, right? A damn near 300-pound Wardlow is completely incapable of overcoming an injury after being blindsided by Joe earlier in the program. But a skinny, frail 140-pound geek is able to do pretty much the same exact thing. Am I missing the mark on something? Because that's what I got out of all this. Actually, it's worse. Because Darby's leg injury was self-inflicted. That was him just being a fucking idiot and doing a stupid stunt for no reason. For Wardlow, he actually had a legit excuse to go in at under 100%. Because Joe blindsided him in the back with a lead pipe earlier on last week. And in the end, Darby still came out on top. Man, oh man. And we literally just got done talking about the burial treatment of FTR. Wardlow, dude. I need to write a book on that guy. No joke. Is there a better example of absolute maltreatment of booking a guy? A better example of totally botching a push for someone that actually could have been a main event player than Wardlow? Good Lord. If I write the downfall of All Elite Wrestling, you know who's going to be at the front cover of that book? Fucking Wardlow. Actually, that'll be the subtitle of the book. The downfall of All Elite Wrestling. Fucking Wardlow. My God, dude. I mean, what do you even say at this point? Are we just waiting for his contract to run out too? Is it a safe bet that he's looking to get out of his deal next year? I mean, at least for Cash and Dax, their contracts are only running sometime through 2023. Wardlow's still signed for another year, right? Man, if there's ever a time to have talks about a contract buyout, fuck the CM Punk thing. Wardlow needs to be right at the top of that discussion. That guy is just... I don't even know anymore. Beyond the point of repair? I know I said he needs to stay off of TV for a while, and man, especially after seeing what they did here, maybe they ought to just throw in the towel and say, fuck it. Dark elevation for you, buddy. I mean, as for Darby winning the TNT title again, okay. Does it really matter? Has there been an actual good TNT champion yet? If there has been, I can't think of one. Maybe Miro? Who, by the way, I think he's one of the guys that beat Darby for the belt initially. But Miro's another guy that's been gone forever and doesn't appear to be coming back anytime soon. He had that one squash match on TV last year, and then we never saw him again because he was filming a movie or something. Apparently that movie production is still ongoing as we speak. Otherwise, Miro's just been off of the show unexplainably for months. So in any case, well, there's your standard bearer for AEW this year. First Dynamite of 2023 is in the books and felt no different from your average everyday Dynamite program. Maybe a tad better than what we've seen in the last few weeks, but boy, is that bar low. I like the Danielson MJF stuff, but that's not really anything new. MJF is the one constant on this show that's usually involved with something watchable. At least his shit makes sense. I know what the motivations are for him and Danielson ahead of their title match. They built up the next several weeks of TV in that one 10-minute angle they shot this week. It was good. Everything else was more of the same. Trainwreck TV, bad segments, and WCW production gaffes left and right. And even with the new setup and staging, I mean, I didn't really note it, but sure, it looked good. It's a new design, but who are the clowns operating it? You can put lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig. Doesn't cover up for all the usual gaping issues that continue to surround this company. And if this was the precedent for the remainder of 2023, strap in, folks. This one's gonna hurt. But now we are ready to move things over to the retro portion of the podcast. Oh man, this is exciting. The start of something beautiful. Got a new NWA graphic up and running. Get a whole new season to review. Because Peacock labels wrestling by season. Makes total sense. We are still sort of in the golden peak years of Crockett Promotions. Even by this time, business is doing extraordinarily well. The top stars are still around. Rapport is good with everybody. But at the same time, 1987 was kind of where we saw a little more roster rotation when it came to a lot of the up-and-coming stars that we were going to see make huge impacts in the 90s. A little ways down the road, we'll see Lex Luger show up. Sting's about to come up a little later on in the year. And, you know, while we still got guys like Dusty, the Road Warriors, the Rock and Roll Express around, you know, we're going to start to see a shift in some of the placement for some of these factions soon. Obviously, the Midnights are going to go through a change in partners when Dennis eventually leaves and Stan comes in. The Horsemen are going to see their first cycle of new guys taken over from the original members when Ole leaves. It's a pretty significant year historically. I don't think people really remember 87 like they do the peak years of like 86 or even 88 or 89 when we get to the more notable standout moments or marquee events. But this is still a very important pivotal year for the NWA that sort of shaped where things were going to be going in the long term for the talent pool. Some of the older breed wasn't as prominent by this point. Some of the younger faces were starting to come in and get a little more exposure. You know, a lot of them were still green and still trying to establish themselves, but this was around the point where you started to see that new direction of the next generation of talent. So keep that in mind as, you know, we review these shows over the next year, because this is going to be very important. So we open this week with footage of last week's U.S. Tag Title match with the Midnights wrestling Barry Windham and Ronnie Garvin. Barry also being one of those aforementioned younger rising stars as well. You know, and we covered that match pretty extensively last week, so we don't really need to go into detail again. They primarily focused on the afterbirth where the heels attacked the faces and Corny rammed his racket into Ronnie's gut a few times, setting up some big story implications for later dates. Meanwhile, we got Tony and David sort of running down things for the show, and while they're talking, off camera, the Rock and Roll Express just sort of meander into the frame very awkwardly. They stand around for a minute or so while Tony tries to wrap up his thought. And, of course, by that point, the girls in the audience are screaming so loud for Ricky and Robert, you can't even hear anything Tony's saying. As for Ricky and Robert, they basically just laid out another challenge to Rick Rude and Manny Fernandez, saying that if Paul Jones likes to talk about how they're so big and bad, they should write up a contract to put their titles on the line against the real R&R team in the NWA, just to see how big, tough, and bad Paul Jones' team really is. I also believe Ricky said something here about being like a Mississippi bullfrog sitting out on a stump. And I have no idea what that means, but definitely sounded like Southern slang if I ever heard it. Then we cut to the ring for our opening match. Brad Armstrong versus Kent Glover. I wrote, they wrestled for a few minutes and Brad won with the Russian leg takeover. Absolutely nothing else to say about it. Immediately cutting back to the booth again for Jim Cornette and Big Bubba, where Cornette reiterated his exact joke from last week about David Crockett's Christmas gift, a gift certificate from the Columbian School of Broadcasting. Albeit it was definitely funnier the first time. Here was a weird faux pas, though. He said that David was not on last week's show to hear the joke, even though David was absolutely 100% on last week's show calling the action. And I explicitly remember that because I remember making the comment about Cornette's joke and David just laughing about it at the desk. So, someone fucked up in the tape editing there. Anyway, he rattled off about 100 different things, a bunch of talking points in the span of about 90 seconds. Here's what I got out of all of it. He mentioned something about the Bunkhouse Stampede matches, which were apparently still ongoing at this point, even though this was airing in January of '87. He mentioned something about the series of scaffold matches with the Road Warriors that are also still apparently ongoing. And then he did a great heat promo on Garvin and Wyndham, more notably Garvin. He just said that Wyndham is a pawn in the whole equation, but as far as Garvin goes, Cornette has never liked him from day one, and he'll be damned if he's going to let some bleach blonde, nappy-headed scrub stand in the way of the Midnights becoming the U.S. Tag Team Champions. And he doesn't know how, he doesn't know when, but by the end of '87, he ensures that Ronnie will be history, even if they have to take him out in a body cast. And again, they're really milking that big angle with the Midnights soon. If you know your NWA history and you really know your Midnights history, you know exactly where this is all going in about a month or so. Won't spoil it for now, but it is leading to some great television. Then we came back from break for the Rock and Roll Express taking on Alan Martin and Zane Smith. And we'll go ahead and cut to the chase with this one, too. Every rock and roll squash you've ever seen, double dropkick, 1, 2, 3. You could put it on a t-shirt. It's pretty much universal at this point. Real talk, though. Imagine being that over back in the day, where you almost literally did not have to do shit in your TV matches, and the people would still cheer for you like God. All these people screaming for the Rock and Roll Express, and all they had to do was go in there, do a couple chain holds, hit their finish, and leave. No one had to land on their heads or necks to get it over. It's almost like wrestling used to get that shit right back in the day. After that, we cut back to the booth for a promo with Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham. And Ronnie said something about Rick and Bull. I really couldn't tell what he was getting at with it, but something about them being legitimate champions. But he quickly turned things over and did a very passionate babyface promo on Jim Cornette. Said that him having the gall to come out on live television and threaten Ronnie is not something he's going to take sitting down. He says that his assertions that Ronnie is nothing but bad company for Barry Windham is bogus, and he's going to show the Midnights just what kind of bad company he can really be when the chips are down. Probably the best promo he's cut in his entire career. And then Barry followed up by talking about the letters Cornette's been trying to send to him to get him to turn his back on Garvin, but he's barking up the wrong tree. Says that him and Garvin should have figured the Midnights were going to use the numbers advantage on them last week, and now that they know what to expect, they aren't going to let their guard down next time. Well, evidently that was a lie, because we all know what ends up happening to poor Garvin in just a few weeks. I also liked hearing Ronnie call Big Bubba a big tub of manure. Come to think of it, Ron Garvin was actually a hell of a promo when he was fired up. Hard to imagine that guys would wind up having better promo delivery when they were actually passionate about something. For example, JJ and Tully and their promo work. Always on point. We had JJ out here talking about how even though Tully's getting to defend his TV title against Tim Horner later on, the bigger conversation is all centered around Dusty's absence, saying that perhaps he's in Jacksonville or someplace in Mississippi crying to all the fans about coming up short against Tully at Starrcade. And meanwhile, the Bunkhouse Stampede served as nothing more than a conspiracy for all the boys to try to hurt Tully and end his career, which they all miserably failed to doing so. Then he started talking about how they were at the bank earlier in the day, and of course, Tully's there looking dashing in his three-piece suit, as always, probably wearing his World's Television title around his waist, too. And God, can you imagine if they had videotape of JJ and Tully at the fucking bank in 1987 cashing checks? And there's Tully in a three-piece suit with JJ wearing his television title around his waist. I wouldn't doubt for a second that Tully actually wore that thing in public. Not after hanging around Ric Flair all those years. But this is great, because JJ's talking about how they were depositing some checks, and at the same time they were moving or transferring some money over into their savings account for extra insurance. And you see, the gimmick with the Horsemen is that they're all very wealthy and they all have disposable income. So as JJ's thinking about moving at least $5,000 over, Tully stops him and goes, "Hey, let's make it 10. And they both smile and start cackling about it like fucking obnoxious pricks. And I started laughing too. So of course, JJ pulls out a wad of cash, $10,000 in hand. And in addition to the TV title being at stake later on, they're also putting up $10,000 on the line. So that if Tim Horner manages to knock off Tully, not only will he win the title, but he will also win the green stuff. Tully reaffirms that even though people may think he's stupid for putting everything at stake when he doesn't have to, for Tully, it's about proving that he's the best wrestler in the world. And he is so confident that he can beat Tim Horner tonight that he's willing to sacrifice it all. World's television title and $10,000 on the line at the same time. And they, of course, make sure to zoom in the camera to show JJ holding the cash to reveal that this probably was, in fact, $10,000. Or, of course, it could have just been a bunch of ones with a $100 bill wrapped around the outer layers. Boy, if there was ever a time to pull out a My Cousin Vinny quote, there you go. How do I know it's not just a bunch of ones with a 20 wrapped around it? But he has this great slimy line at the end where he says that in order to win the belt and the money, everything has to be done in 25 minutes or less. And if they can't win in that time frame, not only do they not win the title or the money, but it goes down in the record book as a "you didn't get the job done because you suck." Oh, he actually didn't say that, but he may as well have. He may as well have just said, "I'm a dastardly heel. Hear me roar." So that was the second best moment of television this week. So then we go to the ring for Ron Garvin versus, not making this up, the White Knight. It all makes sense now. Now we know where the missing knight was in that Survivor Series match a couple months back. And this White Knight bore absolutely no resemblance to anything involving knights at all. As a matter of fact, he had on a weird-looking luchador mask and leopard print tights. A wardrobe failure of epic proportions, this was. And Ronnie wound up killing him with the right-hand punch in about a minute or so. Who was it that Ronnie wrestled a few months back during the Halloween season? Was it the Grim Reaper? What is it with Ron Garvin getting ribbed with having to wrestle the dorkiest fucking job, guys? That had to be Dusty. That's a total Dusty move. All right, kid, here's the opponent. The Grim Reaper, daddy. Make him look good. So after that, we came back for a Dick Murdoch promo. And he sort of ran down the whole big event that's upcoming in Amarillo, Texas for later on. He once again used the term holler and a hootenanny, which I don't think I ever needed to hear again in my life. I heard it on 2 consecutive shows. But he's obviously excited about getting the chance to wrestle in his hometown area at the Civic Center, putting over all the great competition in Crockett Promotions, babyfaces and heels alike, which promptly brings up Tully into the conversation. Tony starts asking about the whole money situation, as we were informed about earlier on. And Murdoch basically worked his way around the question by not answering anything involving the time limit extension or the $10,000. Just said that he's looking forward to wrestle in front of his fans in Amarillo. Is this guy turning heel or something? Seriously. Dick Murdoch has been on the show for what seemingly feels like 8 months. And he has done jack all of nothing. He's wrestled a couple squash matches, done a couple unmemorable promos, and now he's doing all these white meat, I'm so happy to be here babyface promos. And I ask that question genuinely. I really don't have any memory of anything Dick Murdoch was involved with in Crockett Promotions in '87. Can someone actually tell me if this leads to a heel turn? Because I can't think of any other reason as to why they're having Murdoch out there doing these kinds of go-nowhere promos every week. Literally just being a dude. Because that's all Dick Murdoch is on these NWA shows. He's a guy. Guess we'll find out about that. In the meantime, Barry Windham wrestled Randy Barber. They two went about a minute. Barber tried to cut off Barry at the tail end, but Barry fought out of a body slam, quickly sprang off the ropes to kill Barber with a lariat. Probably one of the few instances where I actually could buy the idea that the lariat was a finishing move. Only other person I recall falling into that same camp was Bradshaw, and I still think his clothesline was better. But Barry Windham had a hell of a clothesline. Moving past that, though, we came back for another Jim Cornette Big Bubba promo. Cornette out there to once again run down the series of scaffold matches between the Midnights and the Road Warriors. It was almost a carbon copy of what he said in the first segment, verbatim. Blah, blah, scaffold matches, blah, blah, Road Warriors, blah, blah, 25 feet in the air, blah, blah, falling to your imminent doom, blah, blah, introduce Loverboy Dennis and Beautiful Bobby. And that took us to the Midnights versus George South and Mike Jackson. A very fun little TV match. As Corny noted on commentary at one point here, some actual suitable competition for Bobby and Dennis for a change. To which I said, so what, Brody Chase and Pat O'Brien are not suitable competition? What about the Mulkeys? I'm sure they resent that. No, all kidding aside, some great fast-paced action here from all four guys. I particularly enjoyed seeing Bobby Eaton and Mike Jackson work earlier on, especially during the rope running spots. There was a point where Bobby did a leapfrog takeover to Jackson, barely missed giving him an inadvertent crotch first shot to the skull, but it worked out in the end. Also during this match, Corny was mentioning something about him wanting to receive a personal invitation to the Crockett Cup for '87 after the conspiracy of last year's event, wherein he believed that the Midnights were unfairly seeded at number 3 in the tournament when they should have been in number 1. And had it not been for the Road Warriors cheating, they would have won the entire tournament. Keep in mind, retroactively speaking, we reviewed the Crockett Cup last year, at least the main card matches. We skipped over some of the prelim brackets, but we definitely reviewed the Road Warriors Midnights match from then. One of my personal favorite Midnights matches to go back and watch. And it's a famous match because the match was 99% Road Warriors domination, Eaton and Condrey selling their asses off the entire time. At no point in the match did anybody actually believe that the Midnights stood any chance of winning. Meanwhile, here's Jim Cornette like 8 or 9 months later on television insinuating that they had the match won had it not been for the Legion of Doom cheating. What a fucking heel. I also enjoyed hearing Cornette call out Jackson's bald spot. It was indeed very shiny, very blinding. But the Midnights ended up gaining control about midway through. Basically beat the boys down from there. They broke out a double team flapjack for the pin, which I think is the first time I remember seeing them break out that move, period. They didn't do it that often, but looked great in execution here. George South took a hell of a bump for it, too. So from there, we went to the booth for a Ric Flair promo. And this is classic fucking Ric Flair. Coming out looking fine as always. Custom suit, perfect hair, just looking like $1,000,000. And he knows it. He owns the room as soon as he walks in, and he just stands there for a second, hands on his hips, totally immersed in himself. And whereas a lot of people would view that as arrogant and supercilious, Ric Flair was one of the few men that could pull that off. Standing there talking about how sometimes he feels like Johnny Carson coming out and getting the reaction he gets. But unlike Johnny Carson, none of Flair's reactions are canned or artificial. Because everybody recognizes greatness when it stands before them. He says that when he walks out from behind the curtain in $35,000 jewelry, $2,500 custom suits, driving the best cars and living in the biggest houses, there's only one man we're obviously talking about, and that's the Nature Boy himself. And at that point, Flair begins putting over these scaffold matches with the Road Warriors and the Midnights, to which I wrote down, boy, they're really trying to sell the people on these damn scaffold matches, aren't they? I mean, they weren't that great, guys. Just being blunt with you. The Starrcade match was good, but yeah, I don't think you need to constantly talk about them. But he puts over Bobby and Dennis, saying that even with the Road Warriors being awesome physical specimens, when we see Bobby and Dennis come out here every week and destroy the best competition with moves that even Ric Flair is not capable of pulling off, and makes even Hawk and Animal look weak by comparison. And then Flair basically goes into full-fledged Flair mode by running down a bunch of baby faces and acting all crazy. Says that Nikita Koloff is about to meet his maker in Vladimir Pietrov very soon. Says that Barry Windham may be 6'7", but when Flair's done with him, he's going to be 4 foot, begging for his life. Meanwhile, Flair's practically on the ground doing snow angels and just acting fucking insane. Then he rounds it out by saying that he's never worn a pair of cowboy boots in his life, never wore blue jeans, never had on a goofy hat. But when the Texas girls have seen Flair leave the building, they've all collectively said, "There goes the all-around cowboy." And as Flair exits stage right, Tony tries to ask him off camera when he's going to defend the world title on television. No response. And I think it was at this point where I deemed this the best Ric Flair promo of all time. That is until the next time we hear Flair speak, and that'll probably be the greatest Flair promo of all time as well. So then we came back for an Anderson Brothers promo. Ole started off talking about how people have been trying to assert that his time is coming to a close, saying he doesn't have it anymore. But until that day comes where Ole can't fight anymore, he's got a laundry list of guys he's aiming to make a mark on, directly on their face. And Arn, at that point, takes over and cuts what probably ended up being the best promo of his career. He says that Dusty has walked around since day one to let everybody know that they can achieve the American dream, up to and including guys like Nikita Koloff, guys that he took under his wing to show him the way. But for Arn, it's a personal issue. Every day he wakes up and looks into his gym bag and he doesn't see anything but a pair of trunks. It makes him that much more ashamed that he does not have a championship belt to his name. And forget the rest of the Horsemen, because Arn's got goals and dreams too. And his goal is to rid Dusty and Nikita from the NWA, just like the rest of the Horsemen want to do. And if Arn has to take it into his own hands, so be it. And he turns around and gives Tully the stamp of approval to go in there and slaughter Tim Horner in their TV title match. So yeah, that was a pretty great rapid series of Horseman promos. What a start to 87 in the promo department. Guys hitting on all cylinders on this show. And then we go to the ring for pretty much the TV main event of the show. Tully and Horner for the TV title. Again, with the added stipulation that it is a 25-minute time limit. And if Horner can manage to beat Tully in under that time, not only does he become the new TV champion, but he also wins $10,000 in cash. Man, you want to talk about big fight feel or main event feel? Imagine how crazy that sounds to think that they were able to muster up a big fight environment for a Tully Blanchard Tim Horner match. Him fucking Horner. White Lightning. Again, that's not to say Horner was ever a bad worker or anything, but on the list of guys they were pushing around this period on television, I mean, let's be blunt about it. Tim Horner wasn't any more special than guys like Brad Armstrong or even superstar Bill Dundee and Jimmy Garvin. It's like, yeah, he exists. He's on the show. But it's not like he's a guy that they're eventually ramping up to be a big deal at any point in 87. Tim Horner is just a dude in Crockett Promotions at this point. And they were still able to make this match feel like a big deal for one night. And it was really good too. Horner could go. Ain't no denying that fact. He still had the Johnny Gargano syndrome of wrestling with one facial expression the entire time, but I mean, at least Horner actually looked like he could legitimately kick somebody's ass in a real fight. But it was a solid wrestling match on both men's part. You know, Barry Windham was out there scouting alongside Tony at the announce booth, providing some insight and talking up his under-the-radar issues with Ric Flair that they haven't been addressed all that much on television at this point. But again, you can see where they're starting to plant the seeds with that program for later in the year. Yeah, I love the bit where JJ came over and tried to get in Barry's face while the match is still going on. Some great stuff there. And they pretty much worked this match with Horner out-wrestling Tully for a good chunk of it. You know, every so often, Tully would get in a cheap shot to try to rake his eyes or gain control that way. But Horner was largely in control for most of the match. You know, wrestling Tully down and applying sugar holds. Meanwhile, they're methodically keeping the camera on JJ on the floor, sort of biting his nails and getting anxious as the match goes. You know, one of my favorite moments in the entire thing, Tully ends up posting himself at one point, and while JJ's trying to give Scrappy the timeout sign, he's also comically trying to shove Tully away from the ring post to help him out. As if Tully's shoulder was glued to the ring post and he couldn't move. And when Horner takes control and starts getting visual pins on him, JJ's over in the corner making all these panicky gestures for Tully to kick out. God, JJ was just so fucking awesome in this segment. Finally, Tully's able to take over and work over Horner's leg momentarily. You know, Horner's trying to fight back with the bum knee. They do this great spot at the end where Horner actually winds up hitting Tully with a roll-through, bridging suplex off the ropes, but he gets a little too much momentum off the ropes, so that when he completes the roll-through, Horner accidentally bridges himself into the ropes, so he actually has to break the pin. But Horner keeps fighting. At this point, JJ's practically shitting himself in panic that he's about to lose his ass and this match. Checking his watch, trying to see how much time they have left before the bell. And finally at the end, approaching somewhere around the 20-minute mark, Horner tries to go up to the second rope to hit a big dive onto Tully, but Tully rolls through, leverages the tights, and steals the pin. And at that point, they keep the energy up with having Barry Windham go over to try and argue with Scrappy over the fucked finish. But before that can really go anywhere, Tully gives Horner and Windham the cheap shot so they can kickstart the fight. And while Barry's in there throwing hammers down on Tully in the corner, out comes the rest of the Horsemen for the big beatdown, and they wind up scratching and clawing at Barry's face like a bunch of rabid dogs. Eventually ends up with Tully giving him the slingshot suplex off the ropes. And, while they touched on it in passing in the follow-up deal with the Horsemen at the booth, it still should be known, I had no idea where the hell Ron Garvin was during all this. They sort of covered the fact that Dusty wasn't at the building for this taping, but, we've already seen Ronnie on the show earlier, so where the hell he was while his partner was getting decimated, I couldn't tell you. But wherever he was at the time, he was in no hurry to run out there and make the save for his buddy. Some tag partner. Maybe that heel swerve with Ronnie wasn't such a bad idea in hindsight. Now that my creative juices are starting to flow a little bit. All that said, though, this is great television. A rare instance where the Crash TV format actually serves a purpose, because you rarely saw stuff like this go down unless it was being designed to set up something important for a later date. They had all the story implications for later on. It was well executed, and the people went nuts for everything. It's never to say you can't do this style of pro wrestling. Once in a blue moon, it works. The problem is in today's business where you see this stuff in like every goddamn segment, that's where it starts to lose its impact. There's only so many times in a given show where you can see guys getting jumped or attacked or laid out in some form or fashion where you finally just throw your hands up and say, I'm done. I don't care anymore. Do it once per program, sure. But 15 or 16 times in a 2-hour period, it's too excessive. And I'm not just calling AEW out for that. That goes for WWE too. Moving on, though, we had the Raging Bull and Ravishing Rick Rude wrestle Alan Martin and Eddie Roberts. And this was one of those squashes that was so short, Bull didn't even have to take off his pants for it. They went in there, smashed right over these guys, and Rude won with the Rude Awakening. Although I can probably point out, for the record, Bull wearing the tearaway spandex, not a good look for him. But they followed that up with a quick promo. Paul Jones doing one of his I did not prepare anything to say beforehand promos where he just kind of stuttered and bumbled over himself for about a minute. Rude basically taking the wheel, did a good promo saying that he's been preoccupied with a lot of things, including the Legion of Dumb. Great line. And while Hawk and Animal like to flex and show off their muscles to everybody, whenever they're ready to get in the ring with some real men, Bull and Rude will be waiting for them. It's funny, too, because while Rude was talking, he put his belt on Paul's shoulder, figuring he was going to maybe flex his muscles to try to bury the Road Warriors for their lame, jacked-up physiques. Nah, he didn't flex. From there, Bull took over, did another one of his long, rambling heel promos where I started taking notes and then quickly stopped because the only thing I could really focus on was the giant line of droll that was spewing out of Bull's mouth. Talking at about 1,000,000 miles per hour, trying to get at a bunch of verbiage within the span of like 20 seconds. Basically, he just called out a bunch of the babyface teams and put over how unstoppable the real R&R connection is in the NWA. Not that original phony R&R that likes to say they're here to stay. I'm still trying to remember how long it is until Rude and Bull vanish from the company altogether. I know it's coming up soon, but because of the fact that it comes virtually out of nowhere, it's hard to figure out a time and placement for when it happens. I'm sure once we randomly see Ricky and Robert with the belts again, for no discernible reason, that'll probably be the moment right there. But after that, we get our first exclusive look at, and this is a direct quote, the Big Red Machine. Yeah, obviously not that Big Red Machine. Nah, Kane was still about a decade out, which is quite remarkable timing if you think about it. But no, we're talking about the Russian Big Red Machine. The first look in the NWA for Vladimir Petrov. But Ivan warned us that he was coming. Said that this is Nikita Kolov's biggest nightmare come to life. This is the man that will bring down the hammer of Russian justice on nephew Nikita for his betrayal of the Russian family. So we cut to the ring for the official in-ring debut. It is a 3-on-1 handicap match with Petrov taking on the team of Bill Tab and the Malkies. Because if there's ever two men that love feeding themselves on a silver platter to take a beating, it's Randy and Bill Malky, dude. And for those that either don't remember Vladimir Petrov or have a hard time remembering anything he was involved with in the NWA circa 1987, well, the answer was not a whole lot. Here's basically the breakdown story in a nutshell of what happened. So obviously this was 87, so Crusher Darso, or Crusher Khrushchev for that matter, he left Crockett Promotions by this point, went to the WWF where he wound up as Smash and Demolition, which basically meant that they needed to fill the void with another member of the Russian family. So they chose Vladimir Petrov. That's basically what I remember. I think the rumor at the time was that Dusty wanted to use somebody else to work the fake Russian gimmick, but they ended up settling with this guy instead. And I forget his real name off the top of my head. I'll have to look that up later. Actually, I could just do it now. It'll take 2 seconds. All right, so let's see. Type in Vladimir Petrov. Let's see what comes up. Oops. Oh, apparently there was a hockey player named Vladimir Petrov as well. Doesn't surprise me. The Russians love their hockey for some reason. Here's his wiki page, though. Al Blake was his name. And since I have it open, it looks like his career lasted about as long as his run in Crockett Promotions did. All of 5 seconds. Of course, I'm kidding. Apparently, he went to the UWF for a brief period in 87. Did some work down there with Dr. Death Steve Williams. Then by 1991, he was in the WWF, primarily used as a job guy, it appears. And by 92, retired from the business. So yeah, I think it's safe to say this character utterly failed. And based off the 30 seconds I got to see him work here, he looked like he really didn't have any idea of what he was doing in there, which is probably why they paired him with Ivan, so Uncle Ivan could do all the work and Petrov could just stand there and look menacing. I mean, the guy was built, had a good look, but he also looked like every fake Russian gimmick you'd ever see guys get saddled with during the territory days. So it doesn't look like Vladimir Petrov is somebody we'll be talking too extensively about in 87. But Ivan really tried to dress him up in the next promo. Says that while Nikita is in the locker room shaking in his boots, Ivan and Vladimir are laying out the challenge to Nikita and see if he has the guts to get in the ring to face them. And, well, that appears to be the direction they are going for Nikita and Dusty in the interim. A tag team program with Ivan Koloff and Vladimir Pietrov. I am frothing at the mouth just thinking about it. Maybe it'll be more interesting than anything involving Dick Murdoch. He squashed Henry Rutley in about 2 minutes in the most boring match of all time. And after it was over, I was convinced that this guy is turning fucking heel soon. Because at this point, if they keep this guy babyface on television, it's going to be death TV. And I have nothing against Dick Murdoch, but God, are his segments just brutal to watch right now. So getting off that topic as quickly as possible, Nikita Koloff was out for a promo, saying from the onset that he was here to talk about many things. To which I said, oh God, here we go. Because the show already wasn't running long enough to begin with. No, I'm just kidding. It wasn't that bad. Borderline incomprehensible because of the fake accent, but got the point across. Basically said that he and Dusty want the World Tag Team titles. Said that Tully Blanchard putting his TV title and money at stake is just extra pocket change for Nikita or Dusty once they get through with him. Keep in mind, during all this, Arn Anderson is coming out for his next scheduled match, and Nikita is drawing attention to him in the ring, challenging him to come over and face him. Mentioned something about Ric Flair and said that one day he will lose the world title. Again, I wrote down, well, that's true. Wasn't to the ideal man, but he did drop the strap in 87. Then he wrapped up by calling out Vladimir Pietrov as the superior Russian athlete, but the problem for Uncle Ivan is that he is underestimating how well Nikita knows Vladimir. All the training, all the time they spent together in the gym, Nikita knows Vladimir like the back of his hand. Said there's no law for Nikita, and while Vladimir may be the superior Russian athlete, Nikita is the superior all-around athlete. And just to make sure he got the point across to Arn, he gave him a little gesture. And actually, the next match was not just an Arn singles match. It was Ole and Arn taking on the team of Larry Steven and David Isley. At this point, I think they just officially ran out of enhancement guys to use. So right before the taping, they went out, found a reasonably decent-looking set of adults and said, you guys, put on a pair of trunks. You're wrestling tonight. And for the guy in purple, your name is Larry Steven. And I guess upon hearing that they would be wrestling Ole and Arn, that was enough to ensure their careers never took off. Basic Anderson beatdown. Arn got the win with the AA Spinebuster. Nothing else to add. Nor did I have anything to add about Nikita Koloff versus Chance McCade. Beyond the fundamental question of, what the fuck is a Chance McCade? Was Vince McMahon hanging out somewhere in the back when they picked that guy's name out? Chance McCade. God, is that ever a Vince ring name if I heard it? It's almost as bad as him renaming Casey Catanzaro Katana Chance. Maybe there are distant relatives, who knows. Anyway, Nikita killed him with a Russian sickle. Then we went back to the booth for the Road Warriors and Paul Ellering, this time carrying out the 6-man Tag Team Championship trophy. Perhaps to just remind us that they were still the 6-man Tag Team Champions with Dusty, which, I completely forgot about that. And as quick as they were to mention the fact that they were the 6-man Tag Team Champions, then they immediately started talking about the World Tag Team Championships. Okay, serious question. Why are these 6-man tag titles a thing at this point? Does anybody actually care? Including the people in the company? Anyway, Animal fired off a couple notes about that. Hawk started running down the Midnight Express as little men with little brains and big mouths. He also said that Flair's body is soft. Actually, he said he looks like Humpty Dumpty out of his shell. Boy, I'll tell you, if Hawk actually thought that Flair's body looked grotesque, he should see some of the boys in the business today. If, God forbid he were alive, Hawk would throw up in his mouth if he took one look at some of the people wrestling on those GCW shows. Good Lord. He also called the Raging Bull Burrito, saying the only thing burritos ever gave him was gas. You know, it is an old urban legend. It's been said that as Hawk's career progressed, his promos started to get wackier and more cartoony. I am not going to sit here and say that I was ever the biggest fan of Hawk's promos to begin with. But if this is the kind of stuff I can come to expect with Hawk's promo work in the next few years, burritos won't be the only thing that give me gas. Anyway, they closed everything out here with having the Road Warriors run through Dave Spearman and Clement Fields in about 10 seconds. And I'll tell you, dude, even if the promo material winds up getting lamer as the time progresses with these two, the ring formula never fails. Run out, smash dudes in under a minute, hit them with their finish, 1, 2, 3. The easiest booking formula in the world, and it never gets old. So from there, they basically had a few minutes to kill. So David and Tony recapped the Vladimir Pietrov debut, up to and including Ivan's preceding promo. And while the run was short-lived, they were definitely going out of their way to try to present this like a big deal. You know, it'd be interesting to hear some of the experts talk about what went wrong with the whole gimmick. You know, whether it was just the talent not being able to make it work, or if they just decided to change course of direction shortly after starting it. But it's weird. In January of '87, they were really on board with trying to hype up this program as a big deal. The big seller is Nikita versus Vladimir. And as I look at that on paper now in front of my face, I think I now see why they were so quick to back off of it. Nikita Koloff versus Vladimir Pietrov in a one-on-one capacity sounds fucking putrid. I don't even remember if they actually end up working a singles program. If they do, good God. Brace yourself. But that ended up kind of putting a bow on the first episode of '87. This is a really good show overall. Some great angles, some awesome promo work. You know, the main event guys really stepping it up and knocking it out of the park here. You know, they're always able to jam a lot of action into these 2 hours. 90 minutes if you take out commercials, but nothing ever feels rushed on these shows. They're building up a lot of feuds, giving everybody ample screen time, and even in this one show, you can really see the vision for a lot of the key stories that were about to play out in the year. They're already promoting the Crockett Cup in April, already teasing some of Flair's big programs with the world title. The Midnights and Ronnie Garvin are amidst their feud at the moment. And the Horsemen are starting to see a shift in direction, even though they haven't really blown off the Ole thing yet. Got a lot of fresh stars coming in. And this show even had that great Tully Blanchard-Tim Horner TV title match. Definitely a solid thumbs up this week. And like I said at the beginning, as we roll along with these retro reviews for the NWA this year, don't sleep on 1987. It's not a year people reminisce about all that often, but it is a very crucial year for the business in more ways than one. And the business was still doing very well at this point. Yeah, it takes a while to get going, obviously, because the Bash Tour isn't until the early summer. So as far as the big blow-off matches, we still got a little bit of time before that all goes down. But so far, 87 is off to a good year for Crockett Promotions. And speaking of the new year, that takes us over to World Class Championship Wrestling. And while it's technically the new year, we're still on a bit of a tape delay from the Christmas Star Wars show they taped on the 25th. So we're still technically in 83 at the Reunion Arena. But that's all good. And I've covered a few details on World Class in 84 in terms of the key notable moments or events that are coming up in the next 12 months. And trust me, we're going to get into a lot of it, especially within the next month or so once we approach the February timeframe. I think it's common knowledge at this point, so I'm not going to feel guilty in spoiling it. We're obviously coming up on the anniversary of David Von Erich's death. And it's interesting because when you kind of look at the landscape of World Class in 84, this is still broadly a pretty successful year for the company, especially in terms of gate and revenue. Business was still hot. The Freebirds Von Erich feud was still the main draw in the territory at the time. Even if we've already kind of gotten sick of it because we exhausted those matches throughout 83. So get ready for another year of it. But even knowing that 84 still did fairly well for the territory, you can start to see how things shift as we close in on 85 for the following year. David's untimely death basically backed the NWA into a corner because it kind of forced them to shift course of direction with where they wanted to take the world title picture. And we'll try to analyze it in greater detail when we go over the story of David's death. But what was rumored to have happened, the fallout that led as a result of it, and even with that sad, unfortunate news that pretty much kicks off the beginning of the year, 84 was still a really hot period for Dallas. Like I said, business was still up. The talents at the time were still drawing, mainly the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. And, obviously we're still a couple of years removed from the point where Fritz and Jim Crockett Jr. have their fallout and the NWA basically splits from its working agreement with World Class. It's kind of upsetting when you look at things historically and where it all winds up going. It's always hard to view it objectively and try to immerse yourself in the product now without thinking about what ends up happening down the road. But this ends up being another great year of television. Again, a lot of it I'm seeing for the first time, but it is what it is. So let us get into the second part of the 1983 Christmas Star Wars event. Opening it up with Black Gordman versus Jose Lothario, which was an underneath feud that they were developing on television on and off for a while. Jose Lothario, he's obviously been a regular on Dallas television, so we've seen him sporadically throughout 83 being used. Gordman kind of showed up out of the blue, but the feud they were working here was kind of a crossover that they were doing in Mexico at the time, so they carried a lot of that over here to the States and just expanded on the program in Dallas. The couple of times we've seen Gordman wrestle, he's been fairly entertaining. And they kind of ran through some of their basic spots that we saw them do in a couple of those tag matches from the past. They did the fake out spot where Gordman would try to charge at Lothario toward the ropes, but Lothario would keep hitting the brakes, forcing Gordman to stop in his tracks. Finally, he was able to lure him far enough to the ropes where he could sidestep him, and Gordman went flying out to the floor. Kind of a comedy spot, but it worked in the context of the story they were telling. Generally, I would say it was passable. I mean, both guys obviously weren't spring chickens, so it wasn't the most exciting match to watch from start to finish. I more so kept getting distracted by the random shots of Santa Claus walking around the crowd. Every so often they keep randomly cutting to him walking around the arena, and it was immensely distracting. Now, of course, as soon as they put the camera on him and showed the shots of him walking around, I instantly knew who it was. Not because I remembered the angle, but I knew exactly where it was going for later on. But Lothario ended up stacking up Gordman for a backslide, got the pin, and right as Gordman tried to throw a couple cheap shots at Lothario after the bell, he got a few jabs of his own and basically ended up running to the back. Again, nothing too noteworthy. Solid little prelim opener. Obviously, a lot of these matches were taped in different orders, so I don't really know when they would have filmed this match on the card when they aired it for television. Probably second or third if I had to venture a guess, but it definitely wasn't one of the higher profile feuds. And that was followed up with a series of interview pre-tapes. There were 2 featured matches for the card tonight, the first of which was Kevin and Mike Von Erich going up against Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts. So first, we had Kevin and Mike in the locker room area with Bill Mercer. Actually, more specifically, they were appearing to be standing outside the bathroom. So it's entirely possible that Mercer was waiting for one of the boys to get off the john before going through with the interview here. Hopefully he at least waited for them to wash their hands. In any case, Kevin did what I wrote down in my notes, his damnedest to hard sell the people on the fact that Mike Von Erich was anything but terrible. And God bless him. He tried. He so desperately tried. But we saw that debut segment with Mike Von Erich. I think the balloon was kind of off the rose with him immediately. He basically had the same expression/vocal intonation here as he did in the debut segment. I tried to come up with an actual term in the English language to describe it. The best way I could come up with was derpy. Seriously, that was all that came to mind. And if you need further validation on the failure that was the Mike Von Erich experiment in World Class, this time they didn't even let the dude get promo time. All he had to do was literally stand there and respond with one word at the end of Kevin's promo. You know, Kevin's running down all the horrible stuff that the Freebirds have put poor Mike through. You know, embarrassing him on television, trying to belittle him because of his inexperience. But tonight, they're going to shove it right back in the Freebirds' face. And Kevin goes, "Right, Mike?" And Mike responds with essentially the same vocal delivery and passion as I'm about to give you right now. Right. God damn it. I mean, I know he was horrible. I'm trying not to laugh about it. But my God, he was awful. There's just no way to sugarcoat any of that. Then they cut to Terry and Buddy, where they basically took Mikey to the woodshed and did a great heel promo afterwards, saying he's in way over his head and he's dealing with the pros now. And then Buddy wraps it up at the end by saying that he's had to wrestle with a wig for a long time, but no more. And he reveals underneath the blonde broom wig a newly spawned bleach blonde crew cut, which I don't ever recall seeing pictures of before when it came to Buddy growing out his hair after the shaving angle. Doesn't look half bad. So, coming back, we went straight into our Anything Goes, No Time Limit tag match between the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. Directly quoted from Mark Lorenz here in the ring intros. The rules are complicated, so I will read them after introducing the teams. I don't know why I found that funny. It's almost as good as if Russo came up with the stipulations and then handed it to Lorenz on the card and then trying to sell him on the idea that it's really quite simple. How many times do we hear that in TNA? Allow for me to introduce you the reverse ladder match. It's a very simple rule. No, it wasn't. Okay, so basically here are the caveats thrown into this match. If the Von Erichs win, whichever teammate on the Freebird side loses, he cannot wrestle in Texas for 1 calendar year. Likewise, if anyone from the Von Erichs team loses, not only is Kevin banned from working in Texas for a full year, to which I immediately wrote down "ha" in big bold caps, also, Michael Hayes would be permitted to come back to Texas. Of course, that stems from his recent match with Kerry in the cage, where Hayes took the fall, which banished him from working the Dallas territory for 1 calendar year. So the rules were lengthy, but not that complex. Basically, it's a do or die situation for both parties, because either way, whichever team loses, they're going to suffer in some manner. Now, I should note from the beginning, in this anything goes tag match, where you think that it would be no DQ tornado rolls, because it's anything goes, well, apparently that wasn't the case, because Bronco was still enforcing tags for the match. Although I'm not sure how he would have been able to enforce rolls if it's anything goes. Technically, it should be no DQ, so what rolls are there to break? That was a weird faux pas. But, this is more or less designed to be a showcase piece for Mike. In air quotes around that. But they established the story in the pre-tapes that Buddy and Terry weren't sweating Mike. They were using this match as a way to embarrass him and teach him a lesson that he's not ready to hang in there with the professionals. They kind of played that up with when they were working over Mike in the ring. Mike got a brief flurry of offense over Buddy, but at the point where Mike tried to take a shot at Terry on the apron when he wasn't looking, he got the knee to the back so that Terry could tag in and start getting the heat on him. And they spent a while milking the eventual big tag to Kevin. I will always appreciate Bill Mercer chiming in with his so-and-so exploding all over so-and-so. Can we be any more foul? I wrote down more Santa cameos during this match. Could they make it any more obvious where this is all going? And it was right around the midway point where Kevin got the claw locked in on Terry, to where all 4 guys ended up getting into a brawl. Somehow during this melee, Mike Von Erich was out on the floor with Buddy, and off camera, we did not see this actually take place at the time, but Mercer was bringing it up on commentary how, quote, "There's something wrong with Santa." Well, it's an interesting way to sell something. But we all know who Santa was. It was Michael Hayes. And he would have gotten away with it too. Anyway. But he ends up sucker punching Mike behind the ref's back. Meanwhile, in the ring, Kevin's getting double teamed by the Freebirds. Somehow in that clusterfuck, Bronco took a phantom ref bump. Once again, I don't think they actually caught that on camera. I felt like I was watching an old episode of Nitro where the camera missed virtually every fucking detail and I had no idea what was going on half the time. Anyway, during that, the Von Erichs got the visual pin, but Bronco was still selling. So as David runs out, Kevin gets a sunset roll-up on Terry off the ropes, gets the pin for his team, and as Santa comes in to tease the babyface celebration with the Von Erichs, he immediately decks Mike with a clothesline, and the heels also start trying to beat the shit out of him. Hayes ends up pile-driving Mike in the middle of the ring, and the post-match decision announcement may have been the greatest ref swerve in the history of pro wrestling. I don't recall the last time I saw something like this happen in wrestling, but for a split moment, David Manning and Bronco Lubitsch had the Dallas fans believing that they were about to award the match to the Freebirds for some type of disqualification, as if it were possible to really tell with all the bullshit going on at the end of the match. And this is fabulous. David grabs the microphone and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have informed Bronco as to what happened in this match. However, he has informed me that he is the assigned official, therefore, his decision goes. And at that point, the people immediately start showering the ring with popcorn and soda. Boos are raining down on these referees because they think they're all about to get fucked. And then right at the last minute, David goes, "Therefore, your winners, Kevin Von Erich over Terry Gordy via pinfall." And everyone goes, "Yeah!" Meanwhile, as soon as Terry and Buddy try to argue the call with the officials, there's Kerry Von Erich to start pummeling away on the heels and send them packing. It's one of the wildest brawls we've seen in a long time on World Class. And even with the hokiness of Michael Hayes dressing as Santa Claus, the whole pandemonium of everything going on during the last 3 minutes, this was up there in terms of all-time classic moments. You know, Hayes under the Santa outfit is a very memorable TV moment for a lot of people. It's on the same level as Hacksaw Duggan under the fucking gorilla outfit in Mid-South attacking JYD in the middle of a TV main event in 82. Ridiculous, but I mean, God, you see so much hard garbage in wrestling over the years. You look back at stuff like this and think, I mean, this is moderate by comparison. I more so got enjoyment out of listening to the people creaming their pants over the final decision of the match, as if anybody actually expected that the Von Erichs were not going to get their hand raised in the end. You think these people would know better at some point. But that brought us to the main event, the American Heavyweight Championship rematch between the champion, Chris Adams, and challenger, gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. And has been highly anticipated, if Adams defeats Garvin here, then Sunshine will get 5 minutes in the ring alone with Precious. The no good Jezebel that's caused all the issues between Jimmy and Sunshine to begin with. And as great of athletes as the boys were, as great as Adams and Garvin have been on television in their given roles, let's be honest, these people came to see one thing. They wanted to see a cat fight. Boy, how they were left disappointed by the end. And you had to figure, they were doing almost everything to get you to buy the idea that Sunshine was going to get her sweet revenge on Precious. Perhaps the swerve wasn't all that surprising after all. So when watching this match, I actually had to go back and rewind it to figure out what the hell happened at one point. There's a random part where Garvin just started bleeding profusely from the forehead. I believe it was a blade job, because I saw Garvin laying on the floor near the ring apron after getting super kicked, so maybe there was a gimmick hanging out under the ring apron for him to use, but all I remember is that I looked away for a few minutes to type up some notes, and when I looked back, Garvin was just randomly bleeding. You know, and juice is such a rarity in world class anyway, it caught me off guard when I saw it. In any case, they wrestled a very basic title match. Adams took like 90% of it. And right at the very end, Garvin countered a roll through and used Adams' tights to steal the victory. And the people were none too happy with that call. Sunshine gets in there and tries to argue with the official. She's obviously miffed about the whole situation. And they teased that little scuffle with her and Precious for a few seconds. But Garvin's eventually able to pull her out to safety, and the heels hightail it to the back before Sunshine can really dig her nails into her eyeballs. But she sold everything great. You know, flipping out and screaming at the ref for the bad call. Definitely not the finish everybody wanted to see, but they assured to let everybody know that that is not the last of this program. There's more to come. Good solid match. Sunshine was great as always. Man, I look back, that babyface turn was one of the best business moves World Class made in 83. It's such a shame looking back at how all this developed over time that Sunshine didn't stay in the business for longer than she did. Because, man, people loved her in the Dallas region. She could have been a big star on a national scale if she would have stuck the course. But it is what it is. So, yeah, there you go. The final culmination to Dallas TV in '83, just carrying it over into the new year. But as much as we all love hearing the sound of my voice, I think I've had about enough for this one. We will close things out and return this coming Monday for the Retro Raw and SmackDown report, wherein hopefully we get another pre-tape at the Mysterios with Dominic. God, I really hope there's a New Year's Eve party skit. I really do. I went back and watched the Christmas Eve segment again. I laughed just as hard as when we reviewed it on the Monday podcast. Such a great all-time segment. If we don't get a New Year's segment with Dominic and Rhea crashing Ray's home again, I'll be incredibly sad. I'd rather see that than Uncle Howdy. I'm not even going to get into that. I'd rather see two dogs fucking on the side of the road before I ever see anything with Uncle Howdy again. Thanks for tuning in. Get you all on the Monday podcast. And as always, you can help the channel out by subscribing, liking the show, commenting, all that good stuff. Check out the show on Rumble too, if you wanted to watch from a secondary platform and you hate YouTube for some reason. I don't blame you. I'm still working on ways to upgrade the production of the channel, so you can always stay posted for that. I'm looking at eventually investing in a new microphone to record these shows. The pop filter on this thing really doesn't serve all that well. I especially hear it when I'm going back in my editing bay on iMovie. Again, I'm not a certified video editor or professional podcaster. This is all DIY, so I appreciate your patience with everything. I'm trying, but it's baby steps for me. For somebody that spends about an hour on social media a day, you can probably see why my tech skills aren't exactly up to snuff. But that'll be a story for a different date. Take care, all. Happy New Year. Don't go crazy. It's 2023. Nothing electrifying or life-changing is going to be happening this year that'll change the course of history forever. Don't get excited. Stay humbled. Stay modest. Don't expect miracles. And let's go, Brandon. Peace out.